though he would have either to sacrifice his business upon the auction block and live on a pittance thereafter, or put himself at the mercy of some unscrupulous employee who would in the end probably ruin him.
Top of 1032.
But just at the moment of his darkest despair, this Polish refugee, Sobel, appeared one night from the street and begged for work. He was a stocky man, poorly dressed, with a bald head that had once been blonde, a severely plain face, and soft blue eyes prone to tears over the sad books he read. A young man, but old. No one would have guessed 30. Though he confessed he knew nothing of shoemaking, he said he was apt and would work for a very little if Feld taught him the trade. Thinking that with, after all, a landsman, he would have less to fear than from a complete stranger, Feld took him on, and within 6 weeks the refugee rebuilt as good a shoe as he, and not long thereafter expertly ran the business for the thoroughly relieved shoemaker. Feld could trust him with anything, and did, frequently going home after an hour or two at the store, leaving all the money in the till, knowing Sobel would guard every cent of it. The amazing thing was that he demanded so little. His wants were few. In money he wasn't interested. In nothing but books, it seemed, which he one by one lent to Miriam, together with his profuse, queer written comments, manufactured during his lonely rooming house evenings, thick pads of commentary, which the shoemaker peered at and twitched his shoulders over as his daughter, from her 14th year, read page by sanctified page as if the word of God were inscribed on them. To protect Sobel, Feld himself had to see that he received more than he asked for. Yet his conscience bothered him for not insisting that the assistant accept a better wage than he was getting, though Feld had honestly told him he could earn a handsome salary if he worked elsewhere, or maybe opened a place of his own. But the assistant answered somewhat ungraciously that he was not interested in going elsewhere, and though Feld frequently asked himself what keeps him here, why does he stay, he finally answered it that the man, no doubt because of his terrible experiences as a refugee, was afraid of the world. After the incident with the broken last, angered by Sobel's behavior, the shoemaker decided to let him stew for a week in the rooming house. Although his own strength was taxed dangerously and the business suffered. However, after several sharp nagging warnings from both his wife and daughter, he went finally in search of Sobel, as he had once before, quite recently, when over some fancied slight, Feld had merely asked him not to give Miriam so many books to read because her eyes were strained and red. The assistant had left the place in a huff, an incident which, as usual, came to nothing, for he had returned after the shoemaker had talked to him and taken his seat at the bench. But this time, after Feld had plodded through the snow to Sobel's house, he had thought of sending Miriam, but the idea became repugnant to him. The burly landlady at the door informed him in a nasal voice that Sobel was not at home, and though Feld knew this was a nasty lie, for where had the refugee to go? Still, for some reason he was not completely sure of, it may have been the cold and his fatigue, he decided not to insist on seeing him. Instead, he went home and hired a new helper. Having settled the matter, though not entirely to his satisfaction, for he had much more to do than before, and so, for example, could no longer lie late in bed mornings because he had to get up to open the store for the new assistant, a speechless, dark man with an irritating rasp as he worked, whom he would not trust with the key as he had Sobel. Furthermore, this one, though able to do a fair repair job, knew nothing of grades of leather or prices, so Feld had to make his own purchases, and every night at closing time it was necessary to count the money in the till and lock up. However, he was not dissatisfied, for he lived much in his thoughts of Max and Miriam. The college boy had called her, and they had arranged a meeting for this coming Friday night. The shoemaker would personally have preferred Saturday, which he felt would make it a date of the first magnitude. But he learned Friday was Miriam's choice, so he said nothing. The day of the week did not matter. What mattered was the aftermath. Would they like each other and want to be friends? He sighed at all the time that would have to go by before he knew for sure. Often he was tempted to talk to Miriam about the boy, to ask whether she thought she would like his type. He had told her only that he considered Max a nice boy and had suggested he call her. But the one time he tried, she snapped at him, justly. How should she know? At last, Friday came. Feld was not feeling particularly well, so he stayed in bed, and Mrs. Feld thought it better to remain in the bedroom with him when Max called. Miriam received the boy, and her parents could hear their voices, his throaty one, as they talked. Just before leaving, Miriam brought Max to the bedroom door, and he stood there a minute, a tall, slightly hunched figure wearing a thick, droopy suit and apparently at ease as he greeted the shoemaker and his wife, which was surely a good sign. And Miriam, although she had worked all day, looked fresh and pretty. She was a large-framed girl with a well-shaped body, and she had a fine, open face and soft hair. They made, Feld thought, a first-class couple. Miriam returned after 11:30. Her mother was already asleep, but the shoemaker got out of bed and, after locating his bathrobe, went into the kitchen, where Miriam, to his surprise, sat at the table reading. "So where did you go?" Feld asked pleasantly. "For a walk," she said, not looking up. "I advised him," Feld said, clearing his throat. "He shouldn't spend so much money." "I didn't care." The shoemaker boiled up some water for tea and sat down at the table with a cupful and a thick slice of lemon. "So how?" he sighed after a sip. "Did you enjoy?" "It was all right." He was silent. She must have sensed his disappointment, for she added, "You can't really tell much the first time. You will see him again?" Turning a page, she said that Max had asked for another date. "For when?" "Saturday." "So what did you say?" "What did I say?" she asked, delaying for a moment. "I said yes." Afterwards, she inquired about Sobel, and Feld, without exactly knowing why, said the assistant had got another job. Miriam said nothing more and began to read. The shoemaker's conscience did not trouble him. He was satisfied with the Saturday date. During the week, by placing here and there a deft question, he managed to get from Miriam some information about Max. It surprised him to learn that the boy was not studying to be either a doctor or lawyer, but was taking a business course, leading to a degree in accountancy. Feld was a little disappointed, because he thought of accountants as bookkeepers, and would have preferred a higher profession. However, it was not long before he had investigated the subject and discovered that certified public accountants were highly respected people. So he was thoroughly content as Saturday approached. But because Saturday was a busy day, he was much in the store, and therefore did not see Max when he came to call for Miriam. From his wife, he learned there had been nothing especially revealing about their meeting. Max had rung the bell, and Miriam had got her coat and left with him. Nothing more. Feld did not probe, for his wife was not particularly observant. Instead, he waited up for Miriam with a newspaper on his lap, which he scarcely looked at, so lost was he in thinking of the future. He awoke to find her in the room with him, tiredly removing her hat. Greeting her, he was suddenly inexplicably afraid to ask anything about the evening. But since she volunteered nothing, he was at last forced to inquire how she had enjoyed herself. Miriam began something non-committal, but apparently changed her mind, for she said after a minute, "I was bored." When Feld had sufficiently recovered from his anguished disappointment to ask why, she answered without hesitation, "Because he's nothing more than a materialist." "What means this word?" "He has no soul. He is only interested in things." He considered her statement for a long time, but then asked, "Will you see him again?" He didn't ask. "Suppose he will ask you." "I won't see him." He did not argue. However, as the days went by, he hoped increasingly she would change her mind. He wished the boy would telephone because he was sure there was more to him than Miriam, with her inexperienced eye, could discern. But Max didn't call. As a matter of fact, he took a different route to school, no longer passing the shoemaker's store, and Feld was deeply hurt. Then one afternoon, Max came in and asked for his shoes. The shoemaker took them down from the shelf where he had placed them, apart from the other pairs. He had done the work himself, and the soles and heels were well built and firm. The shoes had been highly polished and somehow looked better than new. Max's Adam's apple went up once when he saw them, and his eyes had little lights in them. "How much?" he asked, without directly looking at the shoemaker. "Like I told you before," Feld answered sadly. $1.50. Max handed him 2 crumpled bills and received in return a newly minted silver $half. He left. Miriam had not been mentioned. That night, the shoemaker discovered that his new assistant had been all the while stealing from him, and he suffered a heart attack. Though the attack was very mild, he lay in bed for 3 weeks. Miriam spoke of going for Sobel, but sick as he was, Feld rose in wrath against the idea. Yet in his heart he knew there was no other way, and the first weary day back in the shop thoroughly convinced him. So that night, after supper, he dragged himself to Sobel's rooming house. He toiled up the stairs, though he knew it was bad for him, and at the top knocked at the door. Sobel opened it, and the shoemaker entered. The room was a small, poor one, with a single window facing the street. It contained a narrow cot, a low table, and several stacks of books piled haphazardly around on the floor along the wall, which made him think how queer Sobel was to be uneducated and read so much. He had once asked him, "Sobel, why you read so much?" And the assistant could not answer him. "Did you ever study in a college someplace?" he had asked. But Sobel shook his head. He read, he said, to know. But to know what? The shoemaker demanded. And to know why? Sobel never explained, which proved he read much because he was queer. Feld sat down to recover his breath. The assistant was resting on his bed with his heavy back to the wall. His shirt and trousers were clean, and his stubby fingers, away from the shoemaker's bench, were strangely pallid. His face was thin and pale, as if he had been shut in this room since the day he had bolted from the store. "So, when will you come back to work?" Feld asked him. To his surprise, Sobel burst out, "Never." Jumping up, he strode over to the window that looked out upon the miserable street. "Why should I come back?" he cried. "I will raise your wages." "Who cares for your wages?" The shoemaker, knowing he didn't care, was at a loss what else to say. "What do you want from me, Sobel?" "Nothing. I always treated you like you was my son." Sobel vehemently denied it. "So why you look for strange boys in the street? They should go out with Miriam. Why don't you think of me?" The shoemaker's hands and feet turned freezing cold. His voice became so hoarse he couldn't speak. At last he cleared his throat and croaked, So what has my daughter got to do with a shoemaker 35 years old who works for me? Why do you think I worked so long for you? Sobel cried out. For the stingy wages I sacrificed 5 years of my life so you could have to eat and drink and where to sleep? Then for what? Shouted the shoemaker. For Miriam, he blurted. For her. The shoemaker, after a time, managed to say, I pay wages in cash, Sobel, and lapsed into silence. Though he was seething with excitement, his mind was coldly clear, and he had to admit to himself he had sensed all along that Sobel felt this way. He had never so much as thought it consciously, but he had felt it and was afraid. Miriam knows, he muttered hoarsely. She knows. You told her? No. Then how does she know? How does she know? Sobel said. Because she knows. She knows who I am and what is in my heart. Feld had a sudden insight. In some devious way, with his books and commentaries, Sobel had given Miriam to understand that he loved her. The shoemaker felt a terrible anger at him for his deceit. Sobel, you are crazy, he said bitterly. She will never marry a man so old and ugly like you. Sobel turned black with rage. He cursed the shoemaker, but then, though he trembled to hold it in, his eyes filled with tears and he broke into deep sobs. With his back to Feld, he stood at the window, fists clenched, and his shoulders shook with his choked sobbing. Watching him, the shoemaker's anger diminished. His teeth were on edge with pity for the man, and his eyes grew moist. How strange and sad that a refugee, a grown man, bold and old with his miseries, who had by the skin of his teeth escaped Hitler's incinerators, should fall in love when he had got to America with a girl less than half his age. Day after day, for 5 years, he had sat at his bench, cutting and hammering away, waiting for the girl to become a woman, unable to ease his heart with speech, knowing no protest but desperation. Ugly I didn't mean, he said, half aloud. Then he realized that what he had called ugly was not Sobel, but Miriam's life if she married him. He felt for his daughter a strange and gripping sorrow, as if she were already Sobel's bride, the wife, after all, of a shoemaker, and had in her life no more than her mother had had, and all his dreams for her. Why, he had slaved and destroyed his heart with anxiety and labor. All these dreams of a better life were dead. The room was quiet. Sobel was standing by the window reading, and it was curious that when he read, he looked young. She is only 19, Feld said brokenly. This is too young yet to get married. Don't ask her for 2 years more, till she is 21. Then you can talk to her. Sobel didn't answer. Feld rose and left. He went slowly down the stairs, but once outside, though it was an icy night and the crisp falling snow whitened the street, he walked with a stronger stride. But the next morning, when the shoemaker arrived, heavy-hearted, to open the store, he saw he needn't have come, for his assistant was already seated at the last, pounding leather for his love.
Okay, now this is an interesting story, and again, I like to teach this story to juniors because there's a sense initially, well, it's just a dumb story about. So let's do it at level 1. It is a dumb story about. At level 1, it always seems to be a dumb story about. It'll only, for example, happen that we will begin to ask questions at level 2. Like, for example, what's up with the title? Like, for example, what are you going to do at the end of the story as it relates to the title? But let's start at level 1. So let's go there. I have lots of juniors who will say, this is a very easy to summarize at level 1. This is a dumb story about a father who is blind. This is a dumb story about a dad who does not get it. Now, of course, at 3A we're going to ask, gee, have we ever read a story? Are we at all familiar with texts in high school about a father who thinks he knows what his daughter wants, especially as it relates to guys, especially as it relates to marriage, only to discover he ain't got a clue? And if some of you have already written down at 3A, Romeo and Juliet, you are dead on right. You are dead on right. You're already playing the game that Malamud will be taking us to. Of course, it's a story at level 1, we would say, about a father who wants to find his daughter a husband. He thinks he has found his daughter a husband in a young man who is a college student who's going to be an accountant. However, his daughter doesn't like the kid because his daughter says about the kid, he's got no soul. He's a materialist. All he cares about is making money. The father is like, I don't understand why this is a problem. And the daughter says to the father, I will never go for a guy like that. Now, of course, the irony, can we already jump to 2B for a moment? The irony is that you, the reader, if you are at all sophisticated, you're already figuring it out. Strobel, for example, will have bolted out, right, of the business when he overheard what was going on with the father and Max. An intuitive father would have been like, oh, something's going on.